Hey, we're back. We're back.
We
More
are.
live from the Heartland. We are here on the left end of your dial, 88.7 Chicago Sound Alliance, and you can get us anywhere in the world on WLUW.org. You can see earlier editions at youtube.com/Heartland Media, and if you really pay attention, you can see segments now on CAN TV. So we all are looking good here. We're looking at the camera. We're smiling. We're happy. And we have one of our favorite guys, Flint Taylor, here from the People's Law Office. And we also have Amy Partridge, who is going to become one of our favorite women. And she's involved with the, tell us the full name of that group.
It's called
the Chicago Torture Justice Memorials Project, or CTJM for short.
And what are you guys trying to do?
So we started in the summer of 2008 to try to create a cultural campaign around the Chicago police torture cases. That, of course, is a cultural campaign that's been going on for some time, but we issued a call for speculative memorials, by which we meant any memorial that you could imagine that might serve as a way to remember the Chicago police torture cases and the 3 decades of incredible injustice that they represent, but also the struggle for justice over that period of time on the part of the men themselves that had been tortured under John Burge, on the part of their families, and on the part of the communities, as well as lawyers and activists. And our idea was that this would function as a kind of grassroots reparations campaign.
So you had people just beating down your door to give you money, right?
Well, we weren't asking for money. We really appealed to artists of all genres, hip-hop artists,
excellent.
Right, visual artists, performance artists, to think about ways that we might create a memorial project that may or may not ever be realized, but to think together about what it would mean as residents in the city of Chicago to contend with this history and our role in it by not knowing about it, by not responding to it, or by responding to it and being part of the movement from the get-go. But the idea was to begin to think about what, as a city, we, the residents, think would constitute a real response and a real sort of form of grassroots reparations. And the ordinance, which I'm sure Flint will talk about, includes a number of the proposals that we got, including writing curriculum for the Chicago Public Schools that has a section on the Chicago police torture cases and the struggle for justice around it.
Wow.
Partly so that this will never happen again, but partly as an object lesson in what we do when we face these kinds of instances of structural violence, right, coming from the state. So there's a number of the kinds of things that came up in this proposal process are things that have now been written into the ordinance.
So the request for reparations is not just about getting money for the families or the victims.
No.
Because those people who've gotten out, some of them have gotten sizable chunks of money.
Well, the reparations ordinance deals with those who haven't received anything. The men who have been, quote, fortunate enough to have lawsuits, and those are few and far between.
Right.
Those are only the men who have been exonerated officially in court. If they haven't been, then they don't have any kind of recourse for money or treatment for any mental damage they suffered from the torture and the incarceration. And that's what the ordinance is geared at the men and their families who haven't gotten any compensation or other relief.
What's your sense of the feeling of the city council will have to vote on this? I know you're having meetings with various aldermen, but I remember that Dorothy Tillman had asked for reparations for slavery, and that didn't go over too big. But this is very different. This is very local.
Source.
This is very much a Chicago matter, but it's also an international matter.
Well, I think reparations is important not only in this country, whether it be slavery, whether it be for Japanese internment, whether it be for other situations that have happened, but of course here in Chicago now it becomes very relevant. City Council, well, we have 2 very strong supporters who sponsored the ordinance, which is now in front of the City Council, that being Proco Joe Moreno and Howard Brookins, who's the head of the Black Caucus and a longtime supporter with regard to police torture. Alderman Munoz has also supported it. And now we're going out and trying to get other aldermen and alderwomen to support it, ones who have in the past spoken up. But now I think this is really an important issue that takes it beyond what the City Council has been asked to do in the past. In the past, City Council unanimously, in an ordinance sponsored by your own Joe Moore, here in this particular ward,
49.
passed a resolution that said Chicago would be a torture-free zone.
Right.
Well, that's very nice, and it's very good that Chicago did that. But didn't cost them a nickel, didn't cost the aldermen any kind of blood, sweat, or tears in terms of what needs to be done to really make Chicago a torture-free zone. This ordinance would make Chicago a torture-free zone in terms of its past history.
So you have Moreno, Munoz, and what was the third support?
Brookins.
Brookins.
And
Howard
we're really
Brookins.
hopeful that Joe Moore will come aboard. We understand the politics of City Council and the fact that the mayor...
You do?
Yeah, we do.
Let's handle that another Saturday morning, because really no one knows that.
Well,
if you know it, I want to talk to you.
Only about the torture issue. And as you know, we did get the mayor to grudgingly apologize.
Yeah, you did.
And that was, we had been fighting for that for many years, but the ordinance asked for an official apology. It asked for the kind of apology that's not kind of offhanded at City Council, but something that the whole city is behind and can be held responsible for.
Flint and Amy, I know you're reaching out to aldermen. How's it going with, there's two different progressive caucuses. Are any other people besides the people you mentioned, people you are optimistic about or you're hopeful about?
Well,
I had thought that Arena was someone who was looking at it, but maybe I'm mistaken.
Say that again, I missed
John
Arena, 45.
I hope he is.
Okay, fine.
At this point, we've got a lot of people who are looking at it. We haven't had anybody other than whom I mentioned who actually step up, because there's a $20 million number in this ordinance, and the $20 million comes straight from how much money the city has paid only to the lawyers who represented and represent Burge and Daley and all of the bad guys in these cases. So that number is something that these aldermen have to own up to.
Is that $20 million a small amount compared to the money that's been paid out for various police malpractice?
Yes, I can answer that.
Yes, it is.
Well, I was looking for a figure, Kate.
Well, the torture cases so far, if you add in what's been paid to the survivors of torture, to all the lawyers who defended, now I'm talking about the lawyers who defended Burge and Daley, and the special prosecutors who have put out whitewash reports and also prosecuted Burge.
Whitewashed.
We're talking about $100 million that the Burge scandal has cost the city already. Roughly the same amount that they want to take out of the TIF fund to pay for the DePaul new basketball arena. So if they can come up with $95 million for the basketball arena, they certainly can come up with $20 million.
How is the DePaul basketball team doing?
No. Amy,
that was the last segment.
Yeah, really. Amy, I want to know where you came from with your great articulate self to this issue. It's got to be sort of an artistic / social consciousness background, right?
Yeah, I actually, it's an interesting story, and I'll be brief, but I actually met Joey Mogul, who's one of Flint's partners at the People's Law Office and who's been working on these cases for the last 30 years. That is, Flint has, and Joey's been working with...
Joey's not that old yet.
Yeah, I know, that's why I corrected myself. But I met Joey after I got illegally arrested protesting the Iraq War. You know, many people got arrested during that famous moment.
Our niece, Molly got...
Yeah, so a lot of people did. But anyway, Joey stepped up, as did the People's Law Office, to support all of us. There's 800 women that were arrested, and I met Joey through that process and learned about the work the People's Law Office was doing, and then we've been, in collaboration since then. And I think part of the idea of the Memorials Project as a first stage in a reparations process, which is now in its second stage, was really trying to think about how to create a social movement momentum behind these cases again. And I just want to say that $20 million that we're asking for as part of the ordinance is is about doing more than, it's putting some teeth behind the apology, right? And actually seeking to remedy the harm that's been done. So it includes free access to city colleges for all the torture survivors and their families. It includes the establishment, and this came up in the open call for memorials as a proposal, it includes establishing a center on the south side that provides free healthcare, free psychological counseling, and vocational training for the torture survivors and their families, and thinking beyond the torture survivors themselves, but thinking about how it's affected their families, you know, in incredibly dire ways, but also communities that have been terrorized by this kind of police torture. So thinking about reparations in a, you know, in a full way.
It sounds very holistic, the approach that you're taking to this, and I'm really impressed that you've even got it in committee. So where is the community support for this ordinance going to be building from, and what other kind of publicity? Have you been on Chicago Tonight, for example,
And what has the press response been, too?
Well, we should be on Chicago Tonight. And
you're on live from the Heartland, and usually when we get someone, they follow it up pretty shortly after.
Yeah, they call our guests.
Maybe it's just by accident, but we've shared a number of guests.
Yes, we have.
Well, Carol Marine should certainly be on this. She's followed the torture cases and been one of our strongest reporters in terms of these issues for almost 30 years now.
One of the things that Amy mentioned was including the history of the torture victims, this whole incident that's happened, a big-time incident in our city, in the public school curriculum.
Yeah, that's
what stage is that at, and is that a part of a broader campaign to include the truth about Chicago in its own history, or is it just an idea?
So right now, it's one of the memorial projects that was forwarded to us, and we have decided this year to work on both researching the history of reparation campaigns of this kind internationally and within the city of Chicago, and to realize several of the proposals, to begin working with other groups to realize several of the proposals. So this is something we are taking to the Teachers for Social Justice, and to think about how we might work together to develop this curriculum. But we also really do want there to be funding for it and an official commitment to it, right, that it ends up actually in the Chicago Public Schools. So other kinds of memorial projects that came up, including one that I think all of us really like, which is adding another star to the Chicago flag to represent the police torture cases, because each of them represents a historic moment in Chicago. That, too, is something that we're considering working towards, not necessarily because we'll achieve that goal, but the process of working towards it is about building consciousness around these cases and thinking about how we relate to our civic institutions and what kind of power and control we have and don't have in relationship to our civic institutions. So part of the momentum building public support for these cases is really through we had 70 plus artists submit in the first round and did a number of big exhibitions that had huge audiences, including kids from public schools and so on come to the exhibitions. And so that's the base that we're now mobilizing around the ordinance in terms of sort of support from the general public, right? All of whom now know about the cases, having responded to the call.
Flint, I'm so impressed with your new friend Amy.
Yeah, she's
really 110%.
The whole group is tremendous, and having been involved in the whole spectrum of this for like 30 some years almost now, to see the broadening of the issue, to see another way to approach the issue.
Really,
I mean, we started out with, and you remember the End of the Nightstick, which our friend Peter Cutner made.
Right.
That kind of struggle. I mean, there's always been some kind of community struggle that we have worked hand in hand with. Otherwise, we wouldn't be where we're at now in terms of Burge being in jail, in terms of having a legitimate chance at a reparations statute or ordinance. But the idea of educating, I mean, we ad hoc educate. We go out and we speak about it. We write about it. We do all these things. But to think about it more comprehensively in terms of history is something that's really exciting, and what I think is very important about the group, and the fact that it's taking the politics to art and taking art to politics, and I think that's very
plus
good.
the awareness that you have, Amy, and have referred to a few times of this is an issue that we learn about not just from looking at what's happened right in Chicago, but looking at what's happened globally to victims of torture. And, Chicago also is the only place that has that victims of torture. It's right here in Rogers Park, and I forget the name of it.
Culver
Center.
Center.
Thank you.
Victims of torture getting help,
Which are
care help.
generally dealing with, or had been dealing with, Central American victims of torture. I understand they have dealt with a few of Chicago men who were tortured.
Yes, some of our clients have been evaluated, and they have been an expert witness in some of our cases. So
Before
yes.
I forget, I just want to ask everyone to give a big round of applause to Flint Taylor, the People's Law Office, for really being on the Burge case for so long.
For all these years.
Because you guys are making history, and I see that you're getting more and more people involved.
Yeah, God love you. Michael loves when I say that.
God love you. And how about, we'll run out of time shortly, but we would like to know what else is really important that we should be watching and paying attention to here in the city, because in terms of the criminal justice system. I know there are still some young guys who got kind of caught up in the NATO demonstrations and kind of were set up, and they're still in jail. One kid just got off. Are there any particular cases that, Flint, that you would like to, or Amy, call our attention to?
Well, first, before we move off the torture, let's remember that it's not only reparations in terms of compensation and all the things we've talked about, but there are still men behind bars.
Yeah.
Because of tortured confessions that were given back in the 80s and early 90s.
Yeah.
And we are fighting in the courts and in the streets, so to speak, for new hearings for all of those men. And there is a lawsuit that's going to be heard in December, and you can get more information about that from the website. And Amy can tell you more details about that. And there's a petition drive as well that's important about the ordinance. But as terms of other cases, Michael, you and I think coming this week, this is the week which will be 44 years now, the murder of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. And if we can't think about these issues during that week, and there's a lot of things going on this week, and I'll be speaking.
December 4th is
That's
when
right.
Fred was assassinated in his sleep by the Chicago police.
And we all
And Mark Clark, too.
Mark Clark, and many of us mark our start of being serious.
It's just a
moving
day that
people
will
to
never
that
mean
day.
anything but that.
Right.
To me, to a slew of us here in Chicago.
And I hope when they do rewrite the history of Chicago for the public schools, they definitely would include the assassination of Fred Hampton, the murder of Fred Hampton.
Yeah.
They definitely must and should, and I mean that's another struggle that we at the People's Law Office have been involved in from the beginning in trying to rewrite that history right from the first week when they tried to say it was a shootout, and then rewrite the history in terms of the fact that the FBI and COINTELPRO was behind it.
Right.
But you have to continue these struggles, because if you turn your back for a moment, whether it's affirmative action, whether it's the murder of Fred Hampton, whether it's police torture, the narrative is going to go back to the police or to the government's narrative. And we see that in all these cases, and we see that in all these struggles. So we have to keep going ahead, otherwise we're going to be pushed back.
Yeah, and I just, so often when something happens and there's a lot of negative publicity, when the police are perhaps proved wrong on a case, you don't get that same kind of publicity. No. People are still remembered for the lies that are told about them or the misinformation that's spewed out by the powers that be.
Amy Partridge, will you tell us what the website is that Flint just referred to, where people can get more information about this?
Yeah, it's www.chicagotorture.org, and if you just Google Chicago Torture Justice Memorials Project, you will also be directed immediately to the website. On the front page of the website is a link to the petition to support the ordinance, which is really important. We're looking to get 5,000 signatures. I think we're up to about 1,500 right now. We've just issued the online petition, but we want to get at least 5,000 signatures as we go forward to get aldermen and other city officials to support it.
Yeah.
We also have a Facebook page if you...
Okay.
So
And
you can also
that's
look at Chicago Torture Justice Memorials Project.
And if you look at In These Times online, we think there'll be an article that'll explain this in more detail.
Who's writing it?
Joey Mogul and I are writing
Okay.
it.
You've been publishing it in the high-level places, I noticed. That's good.
Yeah, well, you got to broaden
Branching
out.
out.
I should
Time
also,
to write, brother.
I should also say that we have an exhibit currently up at In These Times.
You definitely should tell
And
us that.
yes, and it's really focusing on the new aspect of the work this year. So it looks at reparation campaigns internationally and within the U.S. As models for this ordinance and for how we might do this work in Chicago.
And In These Times offices are on Milwaukee,
They're on Milwaukee.
about North Avenue or something.
2040 North Milwaukee.
Thank you.
Okay,
2040 North
2040.
Milwaukee. Excellent.
That's good.
Before
not
we
near
go
Milwaukee.
anywhere, I'd just like to remind people that you can see earlier editions of the Heartland live from the Heartland Show at youtube.com/heartlandmedia. And Paul and Mary Wozniak make that happen, and this interview will be up shortly. And next week, we've got another old friend, Bill Ayers, who has a new book out, and we're going to have Bill on, and we'll have some other exciting guests. So you keep coming around and listening to Live from the Heartland on 88.7 Chicago Sound Alliance. Anything else we got? We want to thank everybody who makes the show possible. We want to thank Nolan Chen downtown. We want to thank Grant Stesko here, Hal James here, Paul and Mary Wozniak, and a host of other people who fill in between and help us out and influence the things that we do. We encourage you to do good in the world because the world needs all the good that you do more than ever. And just remember, all power to the people.
All power to the people.
Thanks a lot for tuning in. See you next week.
You're listening to 88.7 WLUW, Chicago Sound Alliance, broadcasting from the campus of
Thanks, you
Loyola
guys.
University.
You're second. You did. But that guy hooks right over there.
Can't repeat the past.
Yeah.
No.